Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 990, 990, 10 shows away from episode 1000. Wow. And also, we should mention that we turn 19 here later this month. In a couple of weeks, we will be 19 years old. Goodness gracious. Well, welcome to WeatherBrains. This is the pre-show, the magical, marvelous, amazing time where we typically do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time we say very outrageous things. If you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 6 minutes, and that's when the show will actually begin. But for the next 6 minutes, this is the unhinged part, where this is not in the audio podcast, and we just say whatever we want to say because
So behave, Tricia.
Pre-show.
No acting out now.
I'll try not to.
Hey,
Philip.
Tricia, if you need to say anything outrageous, this is the time you want to say it right now.
Outrageous.
Or if you got a rant or just anything you just need to get out of your system, just this is good for the soul. This part right here.
Oh, Tricia's got rants.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
I don't have enough time.
I can see the wheels. I can see the wheels spinning.
She's
This could be
deciding
good.
which ones might jeopardize her future career and which ones.
That's right. You know what?
right.
You know what? My husband is our hydrologist here. We tend to rant to each other.
That's good and safe. He's probably not a whistleblower.
But it's better
He
to
gets
it's better
his
to
own
rant
way.
here on the show here. I mean, this is just the
Okay.
pre-show.
Stop baiting Tricia now, James.
I
want her to
mean,
come back.
The
been a long
best
time since we
content
had
we
on
have
the show.
ever produced were the shows where people just aired it out. They went on a rant. It cleansed their soul. They felt better after they got it out of their system, and the world is a better place because of it. So, and if you need
That
to do a
works for
rant, you
you.
can do one during the show. Yeah, it really works for me. So
The thing is, it's not really a rant. What it is how grateful I am at really the weather enterprise. After Helene, I should have brought into my office. I should have brought in all the cards that we got from
Wow.
the care packages from other offices. People sending us stuff. We had pizza for days. Once the power came back on, of course. And Philip, you probably had those issues up there yourself, right? But people were sending us stuff. Other offices were sending us things. And then we got a random card from somebody up in Asheville just thanking us for our service. And I got the card and I came into my office and I closed the door and I just broke down. Because it's somebody in Asheville sending us a card. Like, what? Don't take this the wrong way. It's like, what business do they have sending us a card? We're just doing our jobs from a nice warm bunker where we have a generator to supply our power. I brought my kids in here because we didn't have power at our house for 5 days. I brought my kids in here, but they sent us a card. And, elsewhere across the country, the world keeps, the sun rises, sun sets, everything is going on. And, we're dealing with our own little issues here at the office. And, at home, our power was out for 5 days. We had a forecaster who had power out for 8 days. But, just last week, when we were going on vacation, we drove 25 up through Asheville and then Marshall. And, Marshall's sort of off the beaten path. You have to go business 25. The town's devastated. I went through I can talk about this during the podcast, but so many people thought of us, and it's just like, it's not about us. It's not about us. We were just doing our jobs. People across the Weather Enterprise are sending us stuff, and it's like, oh my gosh. And the Hurricane Center wants to come up and visit, and then the deputy director of the Weather Service wants to come visit. Everybody wants to come visit, and I'm just thinking about our partners and the residents and the people out there who are impacted. It's like, just let me get back to work. Let me do my job. I don't want to deal with everything else and everybody else. I just want to do my job and focus on my partners and the residents. It was a lot. But that one card that was sent, that was somebody from Asheville.
We need to find out who sent that card. We need to find out who did that. I will tell you one little
Christmas thing just now from somebody in Nashville saying thanks for everything. And it was like, what are you sending us stuff for? We're just doing our jobs.
Well, Tricia, I was in Habersham County, Georgia, where I am tonight, and that's one of your counties. And we had a tornado warning on that Wednesday, prior to. So I was watching everything y'all were doing. So there was a reason for the card that Wednesday and Thursday. What y'all were doing in advance of the hurricane was superlative, and that's why you got the card. So
we can get into reasons, and we can get into all of that too. It was the event was really something. It was really something.
Yes, it was.
Well, see, this was no rant. This was a moment of gratitude.
There you go.
Total moment of gratitude, and that's cleansing too. But what you just saw is that Tricia has a servant's heart, which is what you need to be successful in this business, no matter where you are. If you're working research, operational, you're some grunt, practitioner guy like me, you need that to be successful. She's more focused on the people that she serves than herself. It's very refreshing. So we've all had a lesson here. See, this was a good pre-show. It was an amazing pre-show. So thank you, Tricia. That was good.
Your turn, Philip.
That positivity will get you promoted on Twitter or X right now, I think. So that's a good thing. No, Tricia, I'm actually in Greenville. If you're at the GSP office, I am 2.5 miles from you right now.
Oh.
Are you at Furman now, Philip?
No, I did.
But you went to Furman.
I did
right?
my undergraduate at Furman. That's right. I worked in Greenville a couple years afterwards. I was in Virginia from 06 to 19, and have been working out of East Side Greenville ever since. And so I was in Greenville actually when Helene proper came through. I'd driven back from Southwest Virginia the evening before, with with somewhat lower expectations of the event than what actually ended up taking shape. It was very clear Friday morning that I wound up, oddly enough, talking to and I never imagined something like this happening. I actually ended up talking to a New York Times reporter on Friday at about noon. I was up at a grocery store here at a Lowe's grocery store because I didn't have power. I could get some cell signal up there. Hadn't seen anything, hadn't whatever, but after the precursor event and what had come through, I told them like it'll take a few days, but it'll be quite bad. And I did not even anticipate, after having seen what came through, I did not anticipate the level that we saw. But if you go back into the record, we get a little bit of amnesia, which is understandable, and you'd have to go back decades. There's really not anyone living in Western North Carolina right now that would have seen, of course, a 1940 and definitely not a 1916. But I have an idea that
Boy, let me call Tom. Hang on here.
Yeah.
This is good stuff.
This is good stuff. Okay, all right.
This is too good.
All right.
No, this is good stuff. We need to get this in the actual show here. So hang on. Let's get this thing started.
I'll zip it. Good enough.
Yeah. So, and let me welcome our television audience, those that joined us here at the top of the hour. We have no snow, ice issues. Things are clearing, and we're calm for tonight, so we're good to go here. So let me get the recorders going, and we'll get the good stuff on the actual produced show here.
Yeah.
Although the pre-show is special.
Yeah.
All right, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
That's Bill Curtis. And if Bill Curtis says you're kind of a big deal, maybe you are. Hey, this is WeatherBrains episode number 990. Goodness, we're 10 shows away from episode 1000. And the other thing we should mention here, we turn 19 years old in 2 weeks. 19. When we started this thing, if you would tell me we're still doing this 19 years later, I'd say, But here we are. So getting close to show 1000.
20. Don't look at day over.
That's right. You got that right. You got that right, Troy. This is for the 6th of January. We're into the dead of winter here. And let's just go to the source of this nonsense. Jen, what have you done to us? You've let the gates to the Yukon open.
I know. Happy New Year to you. It is cold and it is snowy, but I will tell you, I did not get the most snow up this way. I-70, my favorite corridor there, north, which is where I am, we only got maybe 2.5 inches up here. And but you get down to Columbus and it was about 6.5. And then, of course, you get further south and southwest towards Cincinnati, it was 9 inches. But of course, we saw the views out of Kansas City and Topeka. It was a mess. So, and then might be something else happening toward the end of the week. So, James, you'll have to talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, it's we're in the midst of it, and I don't see us getting too warm anytime too quick here. And Troy, you've got something going on this week, right?
Yeah, we've got that the Baja upper level low, which is going to come at us here in a couple of days, and of course around Texas. I don't believe I've ever experienced so many events where, is it going to be 31 or is it going to be 32? Is it going to be 33? And that's exactly where we are on this one. I would say if you're looking for a lot of snow, maybe potentially, if you look at some of the model guidance, it'd probably be north. I'd say between you and I, Kim, you, Rick, and I, it'd be somewhere in between there over North Texas. So just kind of watching it down here. But, we wondered where winter went. I think we found it. So,
yeah, there's no doubt about that. And we will have that same system here.
Yep.
And Jen always talks about I-70. Down here, we talk about I-20 is the magical line that can separate a nuisance cold rain from a high impact snow ice event. And we'll be trying to figure that out over the next few days. But let's head up Interstate 35 to, by the way, let me say that Dr. Neil Jacobs, the weather has affected him. He's in travel Hades tonight. He says he's on some airplane somewhere. He hopes. So
the rest of us
I
are
would not want to be.
James. Yeah. Look, we got a full house except for Dr. Neil.
And you guys, I got to wonder too, one thing that we'll talk about tonight, I guess at least mention, is that we've got the AMS annual meetings going on in New Orleans coming up here next week. And I've got to go through Atlanta on Saturday. I think I'm okay. But it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's not like an AMS meeting would ever been held where the weather ever was sunny and temperatures in the 60s. It seems like always some form of weather disaster is occurring somewhere. But that's going to be interesting.
Why do they do the annual meeting in January? It's always been that way as long as I can remember. Who came up with
James,
that?
you're the only one that remembers
commissioner.
The annual meeting in San Antonio, which they did back in the early 80s or sometime back in the 80s, early 90s. And the whole reason they did the January meeting was because, San Antonio be nice during the winter. And if you go back, that ice storm and snowstorm is still part of the record books in San Antonio, right in the middle of AMS annual meeting.
It was a classic.
Yep.
It was a classic. Commissioner, to explain this January situation, you're in charge here.
Well, hey, following up on the San Antonio thing really quickly, we also, then the next time we were in San Antonio was 2007.
Yep.
And that was an epic ice storm. It shut down the city. And coming from Oklahoma, I mean, we left for the conference the day that the cold air came here, and it was early. It was one of those things that the models hadn't captured that thin layer of cold air near the surface particularly well, at least the timing of it. And so they closed Oklahoma City Airport when I got there with the person who's now the MIC of the Los Angeles office, and one of my buddies who's a researcher at NCAR now. We were all grad students. And we thought, okay, we have a connecting flight in Dallas. Let's see if we can beat the cold air and get down there. And so we had this death-defying drive through the ice storm through southern Oklahoma and got to Dallas just in time for them to start delaying flights. And we were like, oh no, if they're not going to let our flight go now, we are so screwed. And so we had to drive. I was helping to run the student conference the next day. So we drove through the night with a bunch of other students. We found a rental van. It was like the only rental that was left was this like cargo van. And I mean, it was something out of like planes, trains, and automobiles to get to AMS. And I got there without having slept, ran the student conference, and it was something else.
I got to go back though, Kim. I mean, if you really want to find the heart of this, we're going to let Tricia and Philip get in here, but I promise. But you go back. This goes back to James in Tulsa. And by the way, James would have been probably in kindergarten, James, when this happened. But there was a hydrometeorology conference that was scheduled by the AMS in Tulsa a number of years ago. You nod your head, James. Do you remember this one, James?
I was there.
We were there for 3 or 4 days. About 3 or 4 days later, the worst flood in history in Tulsa, and we've never been invited back to Tulsa. So
no,
the same with San Antonio.
No,
they said no more, like no more people, and we have not been invited back.
No.
So, I mean, to your question about January, why in the world do we do this? And now we've put into the rotation places like Baltimore and Denver. It's this confluence of factors where AMS actually explored 2 years ago or 3. They put out a survey asking, okay, we hear you. People complain about this, and it's not our favorite either to travel and try to shoot between winter storms. And let's see if there are better times. And it just turns out that with class schedules and with field campaigns, for like a lot of stuff goes on in the spring, summer, and fall.
Yep.
And very active weather regimes there too. It just turned out to be that after the holidays, after AGU, still was about the best time for the most people. So, it's not just cost. Obviously, cost is favorable for what we're trying to do. But now that we're also growing, we're getting bumped into cities like Denver and like Baltimore, and out of places like Seattle, where we used to have at least decent weather most of the time. With more of a maritime climate. Yeah, it's just fun. We're just going to be doing this for a long time to come.
Kim, I think
it is what it is.
Well, no, there ought to be a paper presented on this, the history of the weather in AMS annual meetings, because I think that would be a very interesting topic.
I have kept notes every year since the first time I went to the annual meeting in 2004 of the inordinate, unusual weather that has occurred during the annual meeting, because it's so prevalent. I'm excited. Like, I'm watching this winter storm, and sorry, Trisha, Philip, we're gonna bring you guys in here. We just obviously love talking about weather and our nerdery, AMS climatology. But I mean, the last time we were in New Orleans, I think the last time was fairly mild, but the time before that, there was snow. And that's, like, I'm looking at this system coming in, and we're all going to be trying to fly in there this weekend. And there could be, depending on just how far south the cold air gets, again, we could have this question of, does the freezing line make it that far south? I don't think it necessarily will, but I'm hoping not, because I'm flying that day. And I could, it's a good time to try to get to an annual meeting. You'd think New Orleans would be safe, but c'est la vie.
Our working show title is Nerdery, by the way. I had to look that one up.
That's every show we do, James.
Yeah, well.
Let's go to Rick Smith. Rick, how much snow is going to fall in Oklahoma Thursday?
Yeah, I need to know. I need to know about Ardmore, Rick. What can
Ardmore
I
is
tell
going
my
to be
people?
kind of on the edge. I mean, it's definitely going to be a southeastern Oklahoma storm. Durant, Atoka, Ardmore, Marietta, that area. Probably, maybe a little bit up here, but yeah. And you're all bumming me out talking about AMS, because Kim knows this, but I was supposed to be going. I'm not going anymore, so. It was all I could do not to just hang up and listen. No, I'm just kidding. But
I just freed up my sleeper on Amtrak for any of you who want some reliable transportation to get to New Orleans. So just go ahead and get that while it's still on the website. I had to cancel, so I can't come next week.
We actually had quite a few hours of snow here yesterday, but it was the very light, very dry snow, and we just kept saying, "Well, it's going to end soon." It's going to end soon, and it just kept snowing. I mean, it never did accumulate because it was so windy and so dry. But yeah, we may get some more legit snow down in southern Oklahoma tomorrow, or a Thursday night.
You were getting a little nervous up there in Haleyville today, weren't you, Span?
Well, it was like, when it's 29 degrees and you've got a little freezing drizzle and a little snow in the mix, you get a little worried about the bridges. But at some point it would stop, and it did stop. But like Rick said, but for hours today, just kind of kept going a little longer than we thought. So let's see. James ate a lot. Are you home in front of that fireplace, or are you working tonight? What's your status?
I'm working. It's too cold to be outside around these parts. Yeah.
All right. So you'll be on the news tonight, 9 o'clock news. What are you forecasting for Tulsa? Nothing?
Less than 2 inches appears to be the probable outcome here. I think the southern outposts in the viewing area, southeast Oklahoma, have got a chance, as Rick and Kim have said, of being in that swath of heavier snow. So, it'll be worth doing cut-ins and all that good stuff Thursday evening, I'm sure. Yay!
Hey, it's always fun. But Bill Murray, we got important business to discuss here. So let's bring in our guest. I can't wait for this show to start. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah, James. We drew straws in our company because one group had to go to Topeka, which was spectacular. It would have been incredible. I have a ribbon cutting here tomorrow in Habersham County, Georgia. So I won. I won the trip to Cornelia. They won the trip to Topeka. But I would have been up there with Mark Suttoth wandering around in the blizzard if I'd had my druthers. But anyway, I'm glad to be here tonight in either case with you guys. But tonight's guest weather brain, one of the guest weather brains, is the suggestion of listener Joel Gienung, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, Trisha. I mean, Jennifer, do you have a pronunciation on Joel's last name? Nope.
No.
She's shaking her head. So
No, I don't know.
our first guest weather brain, I've loved watching his videos recently. He's a geologist with a passion for studying extreme weather related surface impacts. His research is focused on the geological aftermath of this high impact weather event. Known for his field work, engaging video content, documents and analyzes landslides, erosion, and other geological phenomena triggered by severe rainfall, and among other things. This is just one thing. I've been watching so many of his videos, and this is what I've gotten out of it. But his unique perspective bridges the fields of meteorology and geology, offering insights into how extreme weather can alter the landscape and affect communities. Philip Prince, it's nice to have you here tonight. I know of at least one young geology student, it's a friend of my son's who's at Furman, who is extremely excited about watching you on the show tonight. So thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you. No, that's exciting to know that there's a Furman personnel there that's got connection and is aware this is happening. Yeah, that's as a Furman alum back in 2004. That is very exciting.
Yeah, great school, great town. And speaking of that town, a good friend of the podcast is with us tonight. Trisha Palmer is the warning coordination meteorologist at the Weather Service in Greenville, Spartanburg. A role now. I'm sure Trisha will correct me where I'm wrong here, but I think she took this role on in 2019. Key liaison between the Weather Service and external partners. We heard her mentioning that earlier, overseeing outreach, preparedness efforts, and ensuring the highest quality of weather services. Trisha's over 25 years of experience in the NWS, previously worked in Little Rock, Raleigh, and Atlanta. Her BS in meteorology from the University of Oklahoma, her MS from NC State. And Trisha, tell me what I got wrong.
I think you got it all correct, actually. Every bit of it.
Well, it is
well done.
So good to see you. And we've wanted to have you on too for several weeks, but we've known it's just not a good time probably. So thank you for joining us tonight. I know you're just coming back from vacation, so hate to throw you into the fire tonight, but we're thrilled you're here. So thank you for joining us.
We're happy to be here.
And Trish, I'll kind of start with you. Can you kind of give us a little overview of Helene in terms of the impacts on upstate South Carolina, Western North Carolina? We know Tennessee, obviously there were coastal impacts in Florida and severe impacts in Georgia. But in your area, talk about in terms of rainfall, flooding, and wind, what it was like in your area.
How long do I have?
Yeah, we got all night. We go to midnight.
All right.
Or till everybody else turns into a pumpkin. So you take as long as you want.
Very good. Well, so Helene, the event was several fold actually, because I know you guys had Jared Rennie on back in October, and he talked a little bit about it. But so the rainfall impacts from Helene were really twofold, because we had the predecessor rainfall event leading up to Helene, which dropped quite a bit of rainfall leading up to the event. So the ground was saturated. So we actually, like we talked about in the pre-show here, we actually had tornadoes on Wednesday night. And we had flash flood warnings Wednesday. We had quite a bit of rain on Thursday. And then Helene moved into our forecast area. We cover 46 counties in the Western Carolinas and Northeast Georgia. Helene moved into our area overnight Thursday night and into Friday morning. So we had the rainfall from Helene itself during that time period. So you put the two together, the predecessor rainfall event or the pre, and then the rainfall from Helene, and we had anywhere from 8 inches of rain in the southern part of our forecast area, which is like in the Lakelands, upstate South Carolina, to we haven't certified all the we're still looking at really digging into quality controlling some of the rainfall records, but we had over 2 feet of rain in the Black Mountains. Mount Mitchell recorded over 24 inches. We've got one of we're looking at like 30 inches of rain. So it was a lot of rain there on the Black Mountains. So the grounds were saturated. And if you look at the way the hydrology, the physiography, whatever you want to call it, of the Western Carolinas is, we've got the Eastern Continental Divide. So we have some of the rivers that flow into upstate South Carolina. We have some of the rivers that flow into the Tennessee River Valley. But then we have some that flow east. They come off the Black Mountains and they flow east across Western North Carolina. And eventually there's a daisy chain of rivers that Duke Energy owns and operates. And they eventually flow down towards Charlotte and then into towards Columbia. So there's a lot of complicated hydrology that goes along with this, with dams that go into this for flood control, and recreation. So, and with the mountains and the terrain, as Helene moved north, all of that is forced to, the moisture is forced to rise upward. And it was just a combination of horrible events. So on top of that, Helene made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. And it just barreled northward. And it was moving very quickly. And usually when you have these really strong hurricanes making landfall, they move so quickly, so they don't also have the rainfall component. So if you go back to Hurricane Hugo in 1989, that was our wind storm of record in the Carolinas, but it didn't also have the rain. If you go back to the remnants of Fred in 2021, it had a lot of rain, but it didn't also have the wind. So Helene was the 1-2 punch, or 1-2-3 punch if you count the pre, of the rain and the wind. As we were looking at the forecast and we were getting closer and closer and closer to landfall, we knew that this was going to be a rain event. We knew it was going to be bad. We knew it was going to be catastrophic. We were using the catastrophic wording as early as Tuesday. And we were hearing from our partners that we're hearing it in your voices. We're hearing it in the briefing packages. Tricia, we haven't heard you use the word catastrophic before. This is getting our attention. So they were preparing, but then as we were looking at the forecast and it's getting closer, we're starting to get more and more concerned about the winds. And so by Thursday afternoon and evening, our briefing packages were including gusts to 80. We don't often see gusts to 80 in the inland Carolinas. We have different trees here. We had full summer foliage here still. And we're not talking about a summertime thunderstorm with winds that might last for a few minutes. This was going on for a couple of hours. And as it rotated around, we had a remnant eye wall that was collapsing, but it was going up in the terrain. So it was able to tap into the extratropical transition and pulling in those winds aloft. It was like nothing anybody here has ever seen. So we had those trees constantly rocking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We had 1 foot, 2 feet of rain. The soils just couldn't handle it. They literally liquefied. We talked to Dr. Chris Godfrey, at UNC Asheville, and he was able to provide some insight from what he saw there in his property. And he that's what he said, is that it didn't even take 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. It was taking 30 and 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts. The soil was liquefying and the trees were just falling over. So you add the terrain. Excuse me, I'm talking too much. Mount Mitchell gusted to 106 miles per hour. There was just no way that the trees were going to be able to keep up with this. So it was a chicken or an egg kind of thing. Were the trees going to come down first? Or were the slopes going to fail from the rain? Give me just a second. I'll let Philip talk for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, let's let Philip spell you for a second here, Tricia,
Sure.
because what I've been so impressed by in your videos, Philip, this was a historic event from a geologic standpoint. Talk about that for a minute. And then I want you to set the stage. Tricia touched base on the Eastern Continental Divide and how the rivers go. You've done such a great job explaining that on your videos that really help us understand why the flooding was so severe. So get into that a little bit too.
Right. Well, I guess we can start with the Eastern Continental Divide. When you're down here in Greenville, Greer area where Tricia and I are, if you look to the northwest, you see what looks like a line of mountains in the distance. That's the Blue Ridge Escarpment, and that is really the expression of the Eastern Continental Divide. It looks like mountains. It's almost more the edge of a plateau. On top of that plateau, most of the rivers flow to the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the rivers start up there and then crash down off of that escarpment and then go out to the Atlantic. The Rocky Broad River that goes by Chimney Rock is one of those. The Green River that goes out into Green River Cove is another. Those rivers in particular, of course, flooded catastrophically, as did rivers going to the Gulf of Mexico. But the key for both of them is that they have headwaters right along the crest of that escarpment, the crest of that step up. So when these moist air masses are forced to rise of thousand or thousands of feet by topography, you get that localized upslope rain orographic forcing that will produce really, really crazy catastrophic precipitation right along that upslope area where all of these rivers have their headwaters. It's an Appalachian classic. If folks remember Hurricane Camille in Nelson County, Virginia, not Hurricane Camille, it's appropriate to say the far flung remnants of Hurricane Camille. That was, despite a variety of variables, that was also an upslope rain situation in the Appalachian Blue Ridge. So in association with those steep slopes that cause those air masses to rise and rain catastrophically, they're steep. If you add excessive water to them, they will lose their strength. They lose their frictional strength. We'll leave those details. That's more of a geology conference kind of a thing there. But suffice it to say, if saturated soil starts moving, it will liquefy. But it's still soil. It still weighs as much as wet soil does. It just moves like a liquid. And that's how you end up with debris flow scenarios. And those, of course, are extremely dangerous. You got that on top of the flooding. Basically, if you put that much precipitation quickly on that kind of terrain, there will be a catastrophic outcome, as was predicted. It's basically an arithmetic kind of relationship. You know it's going to happen.
So Philip, had you studied that Camille event? Was that something you had studied before? Or did you just kind of brush up on it after this happened?
So I did my PhD at Virginia Tech, and after that, I ended up several years later. I taught at Tech for a number of years, and wound up working up for the Virginia Geological Survey in Charlottesville. Up there, Ann Witt, who used to work for the North Carolina Geological Survey, she does a lot of excellent research on the Camille event, what produced it, its signature, if you will, in the landscape today. I had been around it. I'll be honest with you, it did not resonate with me I suppose because I had not really engaged with something like that myself. Of course, after this event, it seemed appropriate to kind of revisit that one and take a look at what it did to the landscape, and really, compare it to what happened here. Now, I've spent a lot of time around the 1916 event in Western North Carolina and the 1940 event as well. Those have probably more in common with Helene than Camille and Nelson.
Well, the 1916 tropical cyclone has significance in Alabama because it floated around central Alabama for a few days before it came up to y'all and was a mess. So I'm going to get back to that. Tricia, I was telling people, I was mentioning Camille on that Wednesday and Thursday. We were trying to pour a parking lot here. And I'm like, there's no way, guys, we're not going to be doing a parking lot because, we're going to get 10 inches of rain. They were like, you're nuts. And, and it turned out to be true. Were you ever thinking about Camille or any of those big flood events in the lead up?
We were, and actually we found great success in messaging analogs to our partners. So when we were doing our briefings and actually talking to our emergency managers, I got a great quote from the Yancey County emergency manager. And for those of you who aren't familiar with North Carolina geography, Yancey County is where Mount Mitchell is. So he told me afterwards, I was able to finally get a hold of him probably about 2 weeks later. And he said, I've been trying to call you for 2 weeks. And he said, every time I pick up the phone to call you, somebody else calls me. So Yancey County, they have had 11 fatalities, and they've still got 3 missing. And I went up there last month and I rode around with Jeff Howell is his name. And it was horrible. It was horrible. And I'm not one, I'm going to digress here a little bit. I'm not one to compare tragedies. Rick, I know you probably deal with this all the time. You're out there, you're doing a tornado survey, and the media will be like, they'll ask, how does this compare to the last tornado or this other tornado? And I don't like doing that because tragedies are very, very, very personal to the people that they hit. This may be only an EF0 and it might not be as bad as an EF2, but this person's house was destroyed by a tree falling on it. I don't want to minimize their tragedy or their loss, right? Because it's very personal to that family. I have never seen anything like this before. Never seen anything like this before. It's just indescribable. And the pictures that you see out there are nothing like seeing it in person. The videos, it's nothing like seeing it in person. But Jeff said that when we were doing our briefings leading up to the event, and we started with, this amount of rainfall and comparing the flooding potential to, in 2004 and then 2021 were different impacts in different areas, but we said, okay, it's going to be like 2004. It's like, oh, okay, that's going to be bad. And then the next time we ramped up our wordings, okay, it's going to be like 2021. It's like, oh crap. And then finally, when we started coordinating with the LMRFC, the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center, who is in charge of forecasting for our river points along the French Broad, along the Pigeon River. And of course, we don't do forecasts for every river, but it gives us a benchmark for all of the rivers in Western North Carolina. And the Southeast RFC does the upstate of South Carolina and some of the Piedmont of North Carolina. We don't do forecasts along the Catawba because of the Duke regulated dams. But when we started coordinating with the LMRFC, and we started getting the record crests, and these were surpassing the floods of 1916. And so by this time, Josh, our hydrologist, had coordinated. He worked 3 days straight. He was basically here for 3 days straight. So I came in Thursday morning, and he was working on the Duke stuff, the Catawba River. And so I was doing the river forecast Thursday morning, and I just started picking up the phone and calling individual EMs along the French Broad and the Pigeon River. And we did the briefing on Thursday, and Jeff said when he heard 1916, he said he was just deflated, and he just had to sit, and he didn't have any strong words to say anymore. There was no, oh crap, there was no any of that. It was just deflation and oh no. And then after a moment of silence and prayer, he's okay, we got to get to work. Because while, like what Philip said, you know, nobody was alive. Nobody's alive now who was there in 1916. Very few people remember 1940. Here in the upstate, the analog was 1949. But by using those analogs, people know the pictures, especially the emergency managers. They've seen the pictures and they knew what to prepare for. The difference is that we have so many more people. We have so much more infrastructure. Yep. And the alarm bells that were going off, and they knew that they had to start evacuating people. And so they thought, okay, we got to get to work.
Yeah, to hit on the no one, Tricia, you said it, just to see it, it does not look like anything. The rivers look different. Quite literally, the land, aspects of the land beyond the rivers, they simply look different. And the interesting thing to me about that, even with 1916 and 1940, I have paddled a lot of whitewater over the years. The Green River in Henderson and Polk County, famous place. It is rewritten. The stream bed is totally different after this flood. And the style of the way the rocks lay in it, it is very much altered. And it makes me wonder if what what existed prior to this was the effect of 1916, but I'm inclined to say it was not. Simply because the arrangement of boulders, the width of the channel height, it's profoundly changed. It really is. And if you think about, up in Watauga County, which Boone, North Carolina area, which was a real ground zero in 1940, somebody say they were 5 years old or something like that. They'd be 85 years old today. There's sort of a family legacy of stories related to this, but it's out of sight, out of mind. And this event, of course, is also so well recorded now. That's a difference. Trying to find there's flood pictures from 1916. There's a huge number of aerial photos from 1940 in Watauga because there was an interest in capturing the effects. But in terms of what I do, I work with Appalachian landslide consultants out of Asheville, and one of our main engagements for the past several years has been mapping old landslides in Western North Carolina and trying to preserve the record of what can happen with an event like this. And with these past ones, it's exceedingly difficult to do because it's just not possible to dig up any kind of records that will tell you this scar in the land, is from a 1916 landslide. So we're not surprised to see a major event, but I absolutely agree that when you actually see it yourself, even if you look at the legacy of effects of things like this every day, it's still it's difficult to take it all in, really.
Philip, it's so interesting. My sister and her husband are both geologists, and I was talking with them over Christmas about this. They've gotten a lot of questions from their own friends about how do you think about what happened, in light of geology. And they said, well, as geologists, yeah, these things do happen. They're important in our record, but just like you're saying, it's really hard to go back to the description of exactly what has gone on. I mean, yes, we expect to experience these things in a geologic time scale, but when you're thinking in the time scale of a typical life, it's a very different. Yeah, geologists aren't surprised this has happened, but I would love to know if you guys could take us back to the most comparable event, the 1916. What do we know about it? So how did this compare? Clearly, there were differences in the land surface, how it's been changed and how populations have moved in, and so the effects are going to be a bit different. But what is the comparison between the two?
Who wants, Trish, you want to go first, or you want to do the atmospheric side, or what's the
Well, sure. I mean, the difference is one big difference is the 1916 flood was due to two successive tropical events, not about a week apart. Helene, on the other hand, had the pre, and then the tropical storm. Now we did have, what was it, like was it PTC 8, 9? I get them all messed up. So we did have a rainfall event a week and a half before Helene, but leading up to Helene, parts of Western North Carolina were in D0, D1. We were kind of dry. We weren't like really, really, really dry, but we were dryish leading up to Helene. But the 1916 floods. So let's see, the first flood. I'll get into this later, but I was actually going to share my pick of the week had to do with 1916 floods, because you really can't understand Helene without understanding the 1916 floods, because those were the floods of record in Western North Carolina. One of the really cool things about the USGS gauge at Asheville is it's one of the oldest gauges in the country. I think the oldest gauge in the country, the oldest USGS gauge in the country is down along the Rio Grande, but it's one of the top 5 oldest gauges in the eastern U.S. But it's been in service since 1895, I believe. So we have a very lengthy record for the USGS gauge at Asheville. So it's just really kind of cool that we have such a length of record for that particular gauge. But all up and down the French Broad, really, Rossman, Blantyre, and Asheville, and even the Swannanoa at Biltmore, we have the 1916 floods on all of those, because all those gauges are so old, and it's unique that we have all of those records, and we blew through them all there.
Yeah, from the standpoint of landsliding, it was probably comparable in its extent and in its severity. The debris flow style of landsliding, where what's called a mudslide, but it's boulders, trees, everything else. There were a number of deadly debris flows associated with 1916. We know the locations of a few of them. We actually did landslide mapping in Transylvania County a couple years ago, and every now and then somebody would tell you a story about the 1916 landslide on their property. Their grandparents lived there, and then sure enough, it's easy to go see the scars in the landscape from that. The difficulty arises in terms of knowing just how many of these, and I keep talking about these scars in the landscape. You can see in some of my YouTube videos, we have this LiDAR imagery. That's the bread and butter of looking at the landscape effects and how they're preserved over time from events like this. And you can see where old landslides have happened. Transylvania was particularly hard hit in 1916, and to look at that, one gets the impression that a huge number of what we see as these little scars and divots in the land are the result of that storm. This time around, a big bunch of the French Broads flood at Asheville came from the east side of the river, from the Swannanoa and from Cane and Clear Creek, coming from like over in Fairview, where the Craigtown debris flows happened. So the overall layout of the system of the hard precipitation and what it did to the land is, it's of course comparable. This time around, the lengthy precursor event and then the really, really, really hard punch from Helene itself, or the remnants of Helene itself. It was that however many inches of rain Friday morning, really hard and fast on a very saturated landscape. It's like that chronology was significant to the amount of landslides and debris flows this time around. And we may, when we get new LiDAR imagery this summer, it may be possible to do a bit more of a compare and contrast. But certainly you're looking at the same type of thing, which is about as extreme as you get around here. But to keep talking about Nelson again, for whatever reason, and this is almost like a different conversation, a different direction, we don't seem to have events here that are quite the intensity of what you see in Central Virginia. But there they are more convective usually. They're not necessarily post tropical. And they're smaller than Helene, but they're more extreme. What we have here is a much larger area of impact at almost that level of intensity, which is, I mean, this to me as a geologist, this has been one of the greatest natural disasters of our generation, just in terms of what it did to the infrastructure and life in Western North Carolina. It will be years before it's back to what it was.
Now, Philip, one of the things on your videos, and they're outstanding, is showing the extreme changes in the actual watershed, the riverbeds themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You first, how will this impact forecasting floods down the road? And Tricia, what will that mean for the river forecast centers and the National Water Center? Will they have to, change their models? And, will you and your hydrologists have to change their processes? So, Philip, you go first, and then Tricia, you follow.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think model is probably the most important word in it. We don't, we can visually observe changes. Really appreciating their full extent, again, remote sensing will be a big part of that. When fresh LiDAR imagery comes out again this summer, it will be possible to actually measure how the land changed and where, both stream beds and landslides and slopes alike. And that will probably speak to that. A lot of material left channels, a lot of fine sediment moved pretty significantly. The Swananoa River, for example, tried to take some new courses around bends. I think the Cane River, coming out of Pensacola, Yancey County, did a similar thing. And it remains to be seen, but in a lot of places, sort of at the foot of the mountains where they had really major flood impacts, the rivers there they're very much alluvial, meaning that they are flowing over sediment that's come off the mountain, sand, mud, cobbles that have accumulated down in the valley. They're not on bedrock. And in the Barnardsville area, which is sort of northeast of Asheville, it's in Buncombe County. It's sort of on the northwest side of the Black Mountains. Tremendous wandering of stream channels. They tried to sort them back out. A couple inches of rain with one of these post-Helene events, and it messed it all up. So I think you will see a period of equilibration for sure, but what that's going to look like in bigger and bigger watersheds, I don't know yet. And I think that would require trying to reproduce that with a model.
Yes, I totally agree. I want to give a shout out real quick to our partners over the USGS, because they're working really hard, because we're gonna need new rating curves. When I go back to like the French Broad at Fletcher, that's a new gauge that's been installed since 2000. So the flood of record there was in 2004. And when we were going through Helene, the forecast was off the rating curve. When we were doing the pre-coordination with the LMRC, the phone call I had with the forecaster there, the hydrologist there, not to get into too many of the weeds, but basically they didn't know how high it was going to get. They were pretty confident on the flow, but they weren't sure about the stage because it was off the rating curve. When you got a new flood of record, you just don't know. And to Philip's point, like when I was up in Yancey County, Jeff Howell, the emergency manager, was taking me to the Cane River, and he was showing that the river used to be here, and there is a bend here, and it decided it didn't want to go around the bend because the force of the water was just so high. And there's a house over here, and it's like, I'm going to go here and just knock the house off the foundation. Well, this is somebody's land. So they're working on trying to get the river to go back to where it was supposed to be. We had the same thing in Chimney Rock. The land is gone. It's just gone. We don't have any forecast points along the Broad River above Lake Lure. It's downstream. But the land is gone. I mean, we've already said, a simple way of saying this is not a hydrologic event. This was a geologic event. I've got an emergency manager that emailed wants me and the hydrologist to both come up and see different things. But his point was, this is McDowell County, the implications from this storm will affect McDowell for many years to come. Our years of experience working floods and knowing thresholds and trigger points has been totally reset on these streams and rivers due to the fact of how the channels have changed. So again, the USGS is having to go out and find new rating curves. And like you guys have already alluded to, the models are going to have to be reset based on the new rating curves. So, Weather Service offices have, those that do have hydrologists, have one hydrologist. And the hydrologists know these waterways, once they get to know them, they know them very well. And it's like our hydrologist, it's kind of like magic. He just seems to know what's going on. An emergency manager can pick up the phone and say, hey, Josh, what's this random creek or stream going to do? Like you mentioned Transylvania County already, Philip. The Transylvania County emergency manager can pick up the phone, call him and say, hey, what's the Davidson River going to do? I have no idea, but he can call and ask our hydrologist. Well, this has all been
it's different. It's
changed.
It's different.
So he needs to go out and see them, see how they've changed. He's one guy, and there's still, I don't know, training that needs to be done and shifts that need to be covered. We're operational. There might be a winter storm this weekend. Things happen. So it's tough because we need to be able to provide good forecast services for our partners. And, rainfall PTSD is real in the Western North Carolina mountains. We had, even just with the event we had a couple of weeks ago, we had people saying there were flash flood warnings out in the mountains. There were no flash flood warnings yet. We did issue some, but this is a very difficult situation that we're in right now, trying to make sure that rumor control is well managed.
Right.
It's difficult.
Yeah, I saw a picture of some of the Upper Davidson River recently, and it's another one of these that quite literally it does not look the same. The color of the water, it looks like from the Caribbean or something like that. I mean,
when I was in Yancey County, the people I was running into. I'm sorry, Philip and I are just sort of taking over the podcast.
Yeah, well,
that's what you're here for.
Well, people in Yancey County were asking the same thing. They said it's 2.5 months.
Is that because all the sediment's gone, Philip?
I would say it's a combination of two things. And in some cases, like the Upper Davidson, everything is polished clean, and the rock up there is going to be kind of a light gray to almost it's not white, but it will have a lot of reflectivity. It's probably like looking at a swimming pool with a white bottom. I mean, it's basically a scattering effect, and you're just seeing the cleanness of the rock. You see it in parts of the world that have really rapid uplift of rock to make huge mountains, at what we call active landscapes that have events like this several times a year. They stay really cleaned and polished because of that. That's what it looks like. In other cases, like you see in some of the reservoirs, that as they have gone from kind of that brown to mustard yellow kind of to this funny green color now, there's probably the transport of fine material. And when I say fine, I mean like clays, almost like you might see in a glacial river or something like that. Think about like Lake Louise or something like that. The number of debris flows we had, the rearrangements of channels that ate up huge amounts of floodplain sediment, like we've talked about. All of these have introduced material into the streams in a way that they aren't used to. So the way we see them, is changing because of that. Again, it speaks to the geologic nature of the event. I mean, you're looking at, when you look at rivers, we think about they carry water. Yes, they carry water. The way river networks are laid out, particularly in the Appalachians, everywhere, but particularly in the Appalachians, the shape, the steepness, how they bend, whatever, it's because they carry sediment too. They're basically conveyor belts for rock that carry pieces of the mountains away. And so we saw them do a lot of that conveyor belting right now, and they're probably going to have to, again, reestablish a balance. But they look weird. I mean, I've heard a lot of people talk about that too. Just like literally the color of the water it's like you got, you're in the same place, but you're not. And it's sort of, I mean, unsettling in a way. I mean, a place that you have thought of as being insulated from a lot of weatherisms. As it turns out, every few decades is very much not insulated.
Man, that change to the sense of place is so striking with an event like this.
Mhm.
So you're talking about just enormous changes to landscape, and not even just for the places that were eroded, but the places even that are near the waterways that experience the waterways in a different way because of what's flowing through them. So there's a whole chain of change. Something I'm curious to learn a little bit more about. There, you've talked a little bit about USGS working with you and how they're doing a lot of work. And related to that, there are other federal agencies that play a role in the flood space, including FEMA, who manages the National Flood Insurance Program, and they have, floodplain mapping. And I'm curious to know if you are aware of any conversations that have gone on about that. So has this changed the exposure and the possible risk ratings that people in North Carolina may expect to face, in part because of just the changed landscape? But there could also be an adjustment owing to the observation of flooding in different places, because a lot of NFIP is based on climatological, experience of previous floods. You've seen a flood, and so here's your risk rating. I'm just curious to know if there's any conversation going on about that, since that is, I mean, it's a really interesting related issue. And there, during this event, there were so many people who remarked, but I didn't even live in a floodplain.
Yeah.
But the thing is that water traverses the landscape. So what has the conversation been, to your knowledge? Either of you might.
I don't.
That's actually interesting too.
That was a lot of quiet right there. No one jumped on that one. No, I don't. I don't have anything substantive, concrete that I know is a precursor to action. But yes, absolutely, parts of the landscape not only flooded, they flooded with rapidly moving water, in locations where you might not have, expected that to happen. In geology, we recognize a floodplain. There's a concept of a surface called a terrace, which is sort of like used to be a river surface, but the river has cut down the land a little bit further, and the terrace is kind of like an old riverbed or something. It looks to me like a number of points in the landscape that we would have called a terrace flooded and flooded severely with this, which is it sounds trite to say it's interesting, but thought provoking is better. I guess we just didn't see it coming, because we didn't have anything to base a prediction on. The closest thing to it, there's a couple of these TVA documents about the French Broad, from decades and decades and decades, maybe the 40s or something like that. There's one called the Maximum Probable Flood at Marshall, North Carolina, which is very interesting to read. We did not meet the maximum probable flood, but we got a lot closer to it than 1916 did. I think there's one for the Swannanoa as well, and they are based around precipitation amounts over X period over whatever geographic area. But that thought exists, but I'm not sure to what extent it has informed what we see today or pre-Helene as demarcations of these various parts of the land.
Sure. Well, you can offer your, just, I guess, feelings, if not like perfectly informed on what's going on that side of the equation, thoughts on this. But to me, that's been one of the most challenging things to discuss with people, because I think at heart, people want to know, following this event, how do I protect myself?
Yeah.
How do I know that this could happen to me? And can I know? And what you are saying is that there's a possibility that there's a failure of the science to imagine, in part because of our reliance on previous record, but also because of the complexity of this success events that lined up in just a way to produce this kind of outcome. How do we talk to people who live in mountainous terrain, in places like this, in light of the potential for rainfall events that could, with climate change especially, become more loaded? What should people be thinking about, and can we offer them really anything?
Yeah. I don't know. I talked a lot on that last one. I'll keep it short. With Appalachian Landslide Consultants, there's a lot of what we do outside of the mapping we do for the state. Talk to landowners who will engage us with questions about property they already have, property they intend to build on. From the landslide standpoint, it's very possible to identify areas where slides are more likely to happen. In terms of the debris flows, the mudslide type of failures, it's also possible, because they move almost like water. They move as a fluid. You can sort of tell where they will go in the landscape. So from that end, it's possible to work towards impact reduction with concrete evidence. As far as the flooding go, take advantage of this event to raise awareness, but Western North Carolina is a nice place, and it will go back to being a nice place. And you always run into with desirable places like that after something like this happens. People will want to use as much of the land as possible again, and it can be challenging to strike a balance. But just don't forget history, I guess. I would say that Swananoa River document, whatever, from again 40s. I'll have to look. It's probably downloaded to my computer. There was an account in the 1800s, the early 1800s. The Swananoa flooded, quote, mountain to mountain. It implied it filled the entire, because it comes down a pretty. It's a narrow valley, but it's pretty flat. The implication there is that there is a substantial event. Its so-called flood of record, at least at the time this document was prepared, was a stage of 26 feet, which was an estimate from, believe it or not, 1791. And interestingly, I presume it was the same flood. Davy Crockett lost his childhood cabin to a flood on the Nolichucky in 1791. And if the Swananoa starts right across the ridge from where the Cane, which is the Nolichucky's headwaters, starts, so we infer perhaps that 1791 maybe had a Helene kind of thing. Now, were we going to make decisions based on like verbal accounts from 1791? No. But there is more of a record out there than people think about, but it's hard to find. You have to do it for a living, and even if you do, it's not something you work with every day.
Tricia, anything to add to that?
Well, the floodplain maps are a little out of my lane, but just talking with some of the North Carolina emergency management folks, it's not a fast process. I do know that. The guy that works for, I visited with the Western branch. North Carolina Emergency Management is split up into 3 branches. So the guy that works for the Western portion that does floodplain mapping, he said that there were changes that were submitted a while back, over a decade ago, that still haven't been implemented. So I don't know how long it'll take to implement changes that were the result of Helene. And to some more of Philip's points, having just driven through Marshall last week, the town was devastated. Like I said, it was off the beaten path. You drive through portions of Asheville. Everybody hears about Asheville. Even if you drive through 25 through Hot Springs, it's on 25, so you can't help but drive through it. But you have to drive off 25 to get through Marshall. I mean, it's horrible. Mm-hmm. But Helene is not the flood of record on the French Broad at Marshall. It was just under 16 feet, but in 1916, it got to 22 feet. And if you go back to look at the records, in 1902, it was 21 feet. if you go back, there was a March event in 1963 and it got to 15 feet. So it's gotten really high, and it doesn't even have to be like even the 1902 event. That was a February event. It got to 21 feet. So it doesn't have to be a tropical system. And so it's just these events happen. They have happened before. They will happen again. And how the folks who have lived there for generations and generations, what have they done before? It's just like what they were doing when we were there. When I was driving around with Yancey County, they're relying on their neighbors and their friends and their churches, each other, and the kindness of strangers. And I don't know how long it'll take for the floodplain maps to be redrawn, but I don't know that some of the people out there necessarily know much about it. They're just picking up the pieces and rebuilding. That they've lived there for generations and they don't know anything different.
Yeah.
That resilience is what I'm hearing in a lot of the videos I've watched through. Of course, none of us have been back into that area. Those are beloved places: Chimney Rock, Banner Elk. Y'all have Spruce Pine, Black Mountain, Little Switzerland. These places are epic to a lot of folks that live in the Southeast. Tell us one thing that really stood out to you, because y'all have been those places so many times, that just blew you away when you saw it and you just walked away going, I can't believe this. Tricia, you go first. Was there any place that you went back and you just went, this can't be real?
One thing.
Every place?
Yeah, I mean,
anyone that stands out?
Just the power of water. Just the power of water. I mean, you know it. What is it, 62 whatever pounds per square inch? The rocks that are moved.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's people have probably seen pictures of I forget which town it is there in Yancey County, the bus next to the church. But whatever county it is, but the rocks that are down the mountains, either from the landslides or just from the rivers, just the houses that are moved. I mean, it picks everything up, and just the power of the water. And it's gone. It'll pick it up and it's gone. There is nothing stopping that water. There is nothing that will stop the water. Every emergency manager I've talked to has said that they'd rather have a tornado any day. Especially the ones we get out here. We don't get the ones like you get in Alabama or Oklahoma or whatever. We'll take these ones out here, but it's just the smell, the mold, and now it's cold. There's just so much. And the debris in the trees. It's just so high. It's just there's I can't name just one thing. There's just so much.
Philip, you've kayaked those rivers and creeks, and anything just stand out to you from all of your studies afterwards?
Yeah, it's similar to what Tricia said. The capacity for significant change in one event, and you have to remind yourself that the mountains are still as tall as they were. The riverbeds they're basically at the same elevation they were, but a lot of material did move to the point that very familiar places are very different now. Most of my work has been in Buncombe and Henderson, so I've not done a lot of Yancey, Mitchell, Avery, kind of up toward high country kind of stuff. But I think the first time I saw Swannanoa, 'cause I had spent a fair amount of time in sort of downtown Swannanoa prior to the event. The first time I saw that, it was, I don't know, I again said it before in this broadcast, I have never seen anything like that. It was very difficult to conceive, even as a geologist, what would have caused something like that to happen. And I would say the same thing about the Craigtown debris flows, where I've been out to a few times. There were several fatal debris flows with the storm. The ones there, and when I say Craigtown, it's Buncombe County, Fairview area. It's the Garin Creek Fire Station is right next to it. The scale of that, and that was even in a location that I think and this is sort of a subjective thing to say, but it's not necessarily the place you would have expected to see the worst landsliding event from this storm happen, and it literally wiped a small neighborhood. It does not exist anymore. It was just people woke up that morning, and that it you don't know it's coming. It goes fast, and just the scale of it, and the kind of the human impact and engaging with the people that lost loved ones to that. It's something. It has legitimately changed the way I think about the landscape. And I, from Greenville, spent tons of time in Western North Carolina, worked there for the past number of years, and it's different now. It's different now.
Well, along those lines, you guys, you've seen the places that are affected. Tell us a little bit about the people who are still there. How is anyone getting by?
I can just say that in the driving around I've done with emergency managers, there's lots of places that weren't impacted. There is a lot of normalcy. I mean, once they got power back and stuff like that. The tough thing is the lack of power, the lack of water, the lack of infrastructure for so long in so many of these counties. I mean, some of these counties the kids were out of school for 7 weeks. They were out of school last semester more than they were in school. And of course, now it's winter, so they're intermittently in and out of school now. They have community bus stops. So the parents have to get the kids to the community bus stops on roads that are subpar, and then somehow get themselves to work on roads that are sometimes subpar. So there's that. There are places that don't that's still in the really backwoods. Like when I was driving along the Cane River, that road is still not paved, but there are houses there. So those places still don't necessarily have power and water. So there are people getting them supplies. There are places way back up towards Black Mountain and those areas, Back Cave, where they don't necessarily have some of the basic needs. So people are having to still do drops. The National Guard was only demobilized right after Thanksgiving. But there are still a lot of volunteer groups that are helping. So like time after time, I've personally asked emergency managers, what can I do to help? And they have, hands down, every one of them has said Samaritan's Purse, Samaritan's Purse. A few of them have said the Cajun Navy. There have been a few others, but every single one of them has said Samaritan's Purse. That one of them showed me a distribution center where Samaritan's Purse was set up. They're giving mobile homes away to people who lost their homes. They're giving good furniture away to people who lost their rentals. So, I mean, what the people need is for folks to find reputable organizations to donate to. And as we're getting farther and farther away from the disaster, others are moving on with their lives. But people here are still there are people that are still in desperate need of help. So I would just ask, please don't forget about the folks, because even just driving around last week, it's still really bad.
And as much as, those areas depended on tourism, how long will it be before their economies are back?
I don't know. I don't know.
10 years, Tricia, you think, or longer?
I don't know if it'll be 10 years, a couple of years. I mean, the Blue Ridge Parkway is going to be down all this year, obviously. The parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway south of Asheville are open. There are some areas in northern North Carolina that are open, southwest North Carolina. I mean, like, we love the Great Smoky Mountains Railway. I was getting emails from them. They were open, ready for business. The areas that you can patronize, please go patronize them. Mm-hmm. They were hoping to get I-40 open, one lane open at the beginning of the year, but there was another slide that shut it back down, or stopped progress. And 441 isn't going to be open. So the only way to get anywhere is, you have to go the long way around south, or 81 to 26, or go 25. Now, if you go 25, you're going to drive through Hot Springs, and you'll see some of the damage there. And then you'll come down into Asheville that way. So you'll see some of the damage if you come 25 through from Tennessee. But it's important to patronize the areas that you can, if you can.
Absolutely. Rick Smith, why don't you take it? Because you've got an important question.
Yeah, this is just fascinating and such a tragedy. And Tricia, I know from talking to people at your office that I know, and I know this had to be hard on the office. Talk a little bit about how the staff got through this. They had some, personal impacts. You mentioned the hydrologist. When you said he worked 3 days straight, he didn't work a day, go home and sleep and come back. He worked 3 days, 24 hours straight. So talk a little bit about how the staff is doing, how they did during the event. How's everybody? I mean, this is a lot to take in, and this is a historic event that nobody's ever experienced.
Yeah. He had every intention, because he went in Wednesday morning and he had every intention of going home and taking a nap Thursday. And that's when the disaster started unfolding down the Catawba River. And it's a lesser known disaster, but Mecklenburg County, I'll segue a little, just a little digression. Mecklenburg County, from what I was told, hasn't had a disaster since Hugo, because it's a very wealthy county. It had a disaster during Helene. Very few people realize that Mecklenburg County had a disaster during this event, because of all the rain that came, all the water. Water's got to go somewhere. Black Mountains, it's either got to go into the Nolichucky and Kane. It's either got to go northwest, it's got to go southwest, it's got to go southeast or northeast. Right? It's got to, and so the one part of the water that went northeast went all the way down the Catawba River and eventually into the series of Duke Energy dams. And Duke Energy cannot let those dams overtop. And the same with any dam, any dam across the country. You cannot let those dams overtop. So you've got to have proper water management. And so as that water is going down the Catawba River system, it flooded everything down there. There was just so much water that was coming off the Black Mountain. So anyway, yes. So he had to handle that because we don't have river forecasts coming down the Catawba River. So he had to handle all the messaging to our emergency managers from Duke, conference calls, and it was just nuts. So he did go home, and he was planning to take a nap, and he had to turn around and come right back in. And he had one quick nap Thursday evening. But yeah, he didn't go home again until Saturday. So he was running on adrenaline. But it's what we do. I go back to Yancey County because he's the one I've been working with the most. He said he logged 11 weeks of work during the month of October. So what we went through was nothing compared to what our first responders, what our partners went through. My daughter's best friend, her dad works for Duke Energy. They have 2 generators, but he was working so much. Her mom couldn't get the generators to work, and he couldn't come home, and they lost all their food anyway. So because he was working to help everybody else. So what we went through was personally, but the office, we came together. Nobody was on leave. Nobody was out sick. We had 7 people here overnight Thursday night as it came through. No, it was 8 people because we had one of our ETs coming in to stay overnight. I can't remember. We logged something like 150 hours of overtime that pay period. Despite, people's impacts at home, it was mostly power outages. We had one guy who had water in his basement, but we didn't have anybody with trees on their homes or anything like that. So there was a real blessing there. We had, like I said, I brought my kids in because my husband and I both work here. We don't have any family here. There was one lady who her husband came in because he works from home. They didn't have any power. People brought their food in because they were losing their food at home. So it was really a community effort. Everybody came in and came together. And it's a dysfunctional family sometimes, but it was a team. It was a family, and we all came together and we all worked together. But the thing is that we were really concerned about our partners, our residents, our first responders, and that's what we were really concerned about. It was truly the service above self. And our point was that we needed to get the products out. We needed to hunker down, and we needed to get the warnings out and make sure that people were warned. And it wasn't just us, right? It was the weather enterprise. So you talk about the TV meteorologists, especially the ones up in Asheville, who were desperately trying. I was getting emails from them. We're reading your warnings verbatim on the air, trying to get the word out. So they wanted to know, where are we hearing about evacuations? Because we put them all into our warnings, and then they would read them verbatim on the air. And it was all, we're talking in NWS chat and Slack and going back and forth and trying to figure out what needs to be done and how to communicate. And then, of course, we had communications outages because the cell phone towers, that was another issue. So in the end, radio was the only way to communicate with people. It was just surreal when power went out, and power, like Philip said, power was out down here, and it was different.
Except at Chick-fil-A on Pelham Road, which never lost power.
Chick-fil-A on Plum Road. My son's birthday was that Saturday, and trying to take him out to dinner was that was a failed effort. So it was a challenge for everybody, but you know what? We got through it, and it wasn't really about us. It was about the people who were impacted. It was hitting us really hard that Saturday and Sunday when we started hearing about more and more fatalities. So my work phone is just filled with texts checking in on, how are you guys doing? How are you guys doing? It was about me checking with our emergency managers. And then I got calls from them later saying that meant a lot to them. So just knowing that we were there for them. That's what it was about, being there for our partners.
Well, you guys did an amazing job. And I know you know this, but just remember to take care of yourself. And, you know, you've seen a lot, you've experienced a lot, things that you've never seen before, and it has to be just a lot. So just remember, you got to, you know, put your own oxygen mask on first. And but you guys just did an amazing job. So you should be proud.
And we were very proud of our staff. I mean, they did. We had some forecasters. I mean, we've got 4 forecasters who've been in the Weather Service for less than 4 years, and to have the defining event of their career this early on, that's a big deal.
Yeah, Trish, I want to thank you because of your efforts. You know, I wasn't paying as much attention to Greenville as I probably should have been. I was on my way to Tallahassee to go through Helene in Florida. And so, you know, I got a text from my wife saying, "Hey, I hear it's going to be bad in Greenville." And that was because of your messaging. And, you know, tune them into you. And, you know, she was able to prepare our son at Furman, you know, to make sure he didn't do anything dumb on Friday morning, you know, get out and, you know, go to breakfast or something, you know, at 8 o'clock at the height of the storm, you know. So I want to echo what Rick said. Thank you. Thank you for that. Jen, you've got something. Why don't you take it?
Yeah, thank you both for being on the show. And there's so many aspects of this that's so tragic, but one thing that really gets to me and is the fact that, and Tricia, you mentioned it earlier, that there are still people missing. And do we know in your area how many people are still missing? Yeah, it's hard for me because I want them to be found, and we want to remember them.
I don't. I mean, like the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website is slightly different from what you'll see in the media reports. So, like, I know that there were 2 fatalities in McDowell County, but the DHHS website says that there was 1. But the McDowell emergency manager says we've confirmed 2. And so they'll catch up eventually. So, like, Yancey County says that there's 3 missing there. And he says that their bodies will probably never be found. He knows the 3 that were missing. He knows what happened to them. One of them is from a family. It's a tragic story. They came over from Ukraine a year ago to escape from the war, like the mother and daughter's bodies were found. 13-year-old son and grandmother have not been found, and he doesn't think that they ever will be. So it's stories like that. I'm not sure how many exactly are still missing, and it's sort of a moving target. But
yeah,
if they're still missing now,
yeah,
it's probably situations like that.
Yeah, it's so hard, and thank you for sharing that. There's so many stories that it's my hope that as the years go on, we will be able to relay some of those stories so we can remember the people that have been impacted and who have lost family members or folks who have never been found. I do want to end it on a little bit of hope. You were talking about, hopefully people continue to give. I was very optimistic when I went to church on Christmas. I live in Ohio, and we are actually doing cleanup buckets for disaster relief, specifically for Helene and for Milton, and it's with Convoy of Hope. So that's another really good group that is still helping because the cleanup's going to last forever. It feels like, it's going to continue to go on for years. And so even us up here in little Ohio, we are still giving. And I want to echo what you said. I just hope people continue to give and not forget how tragic this has been and how it continues to be a rough go of it for folks now. And when I do my radio forecasts, I do some Western North Carolina, just west of you, Murphy area, Silva as well, they were flooded. I just get so concerned talking about the cold. It's just so cold right now, and just in any chances of snow. And so just thinking about everybody there. But thank you for all that you both do to just keep people safe and to serve. It's really amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing with us tonight. I'm always, two numbers that stood out, or one number that stood out to me and one unknown we just talked about, and that's the number of landslides. I think of landslides, I think of hurricanes in Honduras or Nicaragua, but this is the United States, Philip.
Yeah.
It's no different.
Again, if you put enough water on slopes, even our slopes, they will come to life. And if I could, you will see on my YouTube page here in a few days probably a sense of what that would have looked like with Camille. I keep coming back to Virginia because it has had more events that approach this scale of devastation in a small area within the 20th century, really, than Western North Carolina has. I think you could argue that. People would disagree, maybe, but the potential is there. And if you're in my line of work where you look at these LiDAR maps and you see these scars in the landscape, you know that it really is sort of a part of how the mountains function around here. There was a good useful comment on here of like kind of the history research that goes into it. In the 1840s in Clay County, North Carolina, there was a real big landslide event that Thomas Klingman, namesake of what was Klingman's Dome in the Smokies, recently renamed. He wrote about it, and some folks went out after it happened and visited. It was a huge debris flow occurrence. That was pre 1850. You can still see the scars of it very clearly in the landscape, and you undoubtedly it goes back farther than that. It's just not, we don't have a monsoon as such here. It's just not an annual occurrence. It's more of a decadal or sort of a century type of spread between the big events. But Appalachia is surprisingly rugged. If you want to take it way back, during the ice ages, we did not have glaciers here. There would have been a very, very different climate, though. The freeze-thaw patterns would have been different. It's likely that the mountain slopes still have some characteristics from that period that might not match up too well with our current climatic patterns, and they might be more prone to the debris flows like we see. So there's a chance that you're seeing in an event like this, if you could just step back and watch for long enough, this wouldn't seem like something so outrageous. Unfortunately, as humans, with our lifespan, with our scale of perspective, to anyone anywhere, this is really something. And there will be, when we actually get that LiDAR and total up landslides from this, thousands and thousands. But there were thousands in Watauga County alone in 1940. In Nelson County with Camille, thousands and thousands of them. So it's a thing that happens.
And mentioning in the chat that the count may have been over 2,000 landslides. The 1,400 I had was probably an
it's more
estimate.
than that. Oh, it's way more than 2,000. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, we can't see them yet, and it's not possible to go out on foot and catalog all of them yet. But no, I would say you would have to start asking, like, are you cutting off? We had a lot of smaller ones. An event like this will make these. One of the most famous videos, Sugar Grove, North Carolina, the folks are on the porch. This wave of mud comes down and hits their house. The guy says, "My car is gone." It was one of the earliest, kind of web videos that came out. That was a very destructive landslide. It will have a very small, almost unbelievably small scar in the landscape. There will be who knows how many things that size from this event. It will go beyond 2000, undoubtedly.
And Jen's comment about the missing is always a concern to me, because I think about historic events like the event Philip has talked about extensively tonight, 1969, Hurricane, Audrey, 1957. There were dozens and hundreds of people missing, and you just don't think that's possible today. Estes Park, the flood, people missing, and to have people missing just really is very, very haunting, James Spann.
So Tricia, let's say you could wave a magic wand and go back 3 days prior to the arrival of Helene. What would you do differently based on what you've learned in terms of messaging the public about the impending danger?
I don't know that we, as the Weather Service, could have done much different than we did with the rain. I think maybe we could have sounded the horn a little bit more because we interface directly with emergency managers and media. I think we could have sounded the horn maybe a little bit more with the media. But I think what none of us, how do you tell the public this is going to be the worst event you've ever experienced? Mm-hmm. How does anybody wrap their head around that?
They don't.
When we don't even know. I mean, we know how much rain that's going to. We know meteorologically what these numbers are, but what does that mean? The other thing is with the wind. When we can't even wrap our heads around what do gusts to 70 or 80 miles per hour mean with full foliage in inland Western Carolinas for a couple of hours with rotating, collapsing eye wall. And I tell you, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds between emails to the webmaster, emails to me, phone calls. Everybody thought that they had a tornado. That was a significant stressor for me personally because everybody wanted me to survey it. And it wasn't a tornado. It was a collapsing remnant eye wall, right? We had a tropical storm with hurricane force wind gusts, and trying to explain that when everybody thought, no, I had a tornado. No, actually you didn't. But I don't want to put anybody down scientifically. It was a tornado would have been easier. How do we did we drop the ball? Did we miss the mark here? Not quite, because the extensive power outages, even in the upstate, and we've talked to our colleagues in Peachtree City and Columbia, where, I mean, like Augusta had that, they were hammered there. It was like an EF2 went through across the entire city. And that was overnight though, so they couldn't see the devastation until people were waking up. So by the time it got up here, we sort of knew what was coming. How do we warn people about that? We had a tropical storm warning out. Do we issue a hurricane warning? It wasn't a hurricane. Do we issue a severe thunderstorm warning? Well, nobody pays attention to severe thunderstorm warnings. Everybody ignores those. What do we issue? Do we issue an extreme wind warning? Well, that didn't meet the thresholds. What do we issue to tell people this is really bad? Don't get out on the roads. We had 29 fatalities in the upstate of South Carolina in our forecast area. You go down to Columbia's area and Peachtree City's area, there were more fatalities, and a lot of these were just from trees falling because people were out on the roads. How do we message the wind impacts and the prolonged power outages, and then the fatalities from lack of necessities because people didn't have their oxygen or their power? That was something that I don't know that we quite saw coming, even though we knew it was coming. Does that make sense? That's really hard.
Kim, I say this is a Kim question. Kim, do you have any comments on all these questions that Tricia was asking here?
Yeah, Kim, answer it for me.
No, man, you're the expert.
Please.
My role in these conversations is so often to look at you and all of our Weather Service colleagues and just say, you really did the best you could. And there is no sense in beating yourself up over a fanciful, well, what if? I mean, this was not just a meteorological event, but it was a geologic event, and it was a power system event, and it was a confluence of things that no single part of the equation was entirely cognizant of or responsible over. And there, when there's a failure of the imagination for just how the sequence of dominoes was going to fall, that's just a hard problem. So part of me, the question I asked earlier, Philip, of you about how are we going to think about managing the land at this point? To me, it comes down to how do we rebuild and how do we think about this moving forward? Because now it is in the popular imagination that such a thing can occur. And I'm kind of intrigued by countries that do experience mudslides, landslides more often. I think of, I've learned through this event that Bangladesh, which often experiences things like this, they have implemented building code strategies along hillsides that have reduced fatalities in similar events by an order or two of magnitude, which is huge. So to me, part of this is, let's not beat ourselves up over what was and how, like Trisha, I think you guys just absolutely did everything that was reasonable to do. By the time it was evident, the whole proposition was, can we evacuate people? And that would have been its own terrible thing, the very risky thing. There've been emergency management academics who've opined that could have caused more lives. At that point, it was this sort of everyone had to do the best they could with what they had. So now how do we move forward, Philip?
It's a good question, and I would say for lack of having, again, really good concrete answers at this point, at least the documentation of this event, it should remain in the collective imagination for longer than the previous events. I don't know. One of the most interesting things I've done is look like I'm deflecting here, which maybe I am just a bit because I don't have an answer for it. There's a show on Amazon Prime. It's called Deadly Flood or something like that. It's about the Ahr Valley flood in Germany in 2021. You could watch that documentary and almost imagine Swannanoa and Biltmore Village, or Pensacola and Poplar, North Carolina. The similarities, the scale of the event, what it did to the landscape, they're quite remarkable. And I'm not even sure, and there have been events like that in continental Europe, just comparing kind of higher latitude settings, maybe again that aren't monsoonal or aren't active or as active tectonic, maybe as like a Himalaya or something like that. It will require changing the way we think about things, and it will be unfamiliar to people, or it may be difficult for people to accept trying to do things differently in a place that is normally so seemingly stable and forgiving. And then you run the risk of there not being a follow-up event. Say you implement all these changes and you don't see anything like it for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. People may start forgetting about it, but you ask yourself, was this, you have to keep in mind, I mean, people are going to presumably be living in Appalachia for more than just this generation, so we want to leave, if nothing else, a record of what happened here and what can happen going forward. But there are plenty of places now that it would even be difficult to rebuild on them just because of changes that have happened. So there will be from the planning and civil engineering standpoint, there will be changes, residential, road infrastructure, bridges, thinking about water infrastructure resiliency and keeping erosion from taking out water infrastructure like it did to Asheville. There's a lot of things that, again, that weren't imagined that became real and will be considered going forward.
Well, thanks to both of you. And Tricia, listen, the Weather Service products were unbelievably good. And you need to understand that. They were just outstanding. And I think we all agree on that. But we have to take a quick break. We're going to stop for just a moment, hear from Tony Rice, who does the astronomy report. We have Jen, and this week in tornado history, we'll come back with a quick email segment, and then everybody will be doing a pick of the week as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
This week, look for a trio of planets in the evening sky. Jupiter continues to be big and bright, having just passed opposition, both in its orbit and ours, when it is exactly opposite the Sun in our sky. This is also when it's at its closest, and therefore brightest. Jupiter will continue to be very bright for the next several weeks. Also look for Venus in the early evening sky in the southwest. It's big and bright and easy to find, and will help you find Saturn. To find the ring planet, draw an imaginary line from Venus to the first quarter moon tonight. Saturn will be about a quarter of the way along that line. By Friday evening, the nearly full moon will be alongside Jupiter in the southeast, separated by about 6 degrees or the width of your 4 fingers on your outstretched hand. Saturn's a planet that amateur astronomers will be keeping a good eye on this year. Even with a small telescope, you can make out its rings, at least for now. By March, those rings will no longer be visible to us here on Earth, though they are about 175,000 miles across. That ring system's only about a mile thick. Normally we can see those rings just fine, but about every 14 years, Saturn and Earth's orbit bring them to a place where we're looking edge on to those thin rings, making them disappear, much like when you turn a piece of paper and look at it on edge. Another date that astronomers have circled on their calendars this month is next Monday, the 13th, when nearly all of North America will be able to see a lunar occultation of Mars. The full moon will move in front of Mars, hiding it for a little more than an hour. The show starts around 9:15 Eastern in the mid-Atlantic states, a little earlier to the south and a little later to the north. This is the last planetary occultation that we'll see until October of next year, when Jupiter will disappear behind the moon before sunrise. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, January 6th, 1946, a tornado given a rating of F4 moved through Ashley and Chico counties in Arkansas. The path length was 23 miles. It moved from near Wilmette to southeast of Lake Village. Homes of all sizes were leveled by this large tornado, and over 20 were destroyed on 2 plantations near Wilmette. 3 homes were blown into Lake Chico. 3 people were killed and 50 injured. 6 tornadoes were produced during the late afternoon and early evening of January 7th, 1989. The most significant twister of the day hit the small town of Allendale, Illinois, in Wabash County. For the storm data narrative from January 1989, much of the town was obliterated. 55 people were injured along the 22-mile path. January 8th, 2019, an EF1 tornado moved across Mosquito Lake into the town of Cortland, Ohio. Numerous trees were knocked down and there was significant damage at a cemetery. January 9th, 1898. An F2 tornado moved 2 miles through parts of Union County, Kentucky. The narrow path moved through Morganfield, and several businesses and City Hall were damaged. There was 1 fatality. A police officer was killed at his desk in the City Hall building as walls collapsed. An outbreak of 39 tornadoes occurred across parts of 9 states on January 10th, 1975. The strongest tornado of the day was given a rating of F4. It had a long track through parts of Pike, Lincoln, Lawrence, and Simpson counties in Mississippi. Thomas Grzulis in Significant Tornadoes notes this may have been a family of tornadoes. Some of the worst damage were in the towns of Macomb and Summit. 9 people were killed, 210 were injured. January 11th, 2020, a high-end EF2 tornado with 130-mile-per-hour winds touched down for only a half mile as it moved across the North Central High School in Kershaw County, South Carolina. Extensive damage occurred as the twister tore off parts of the roof and collapsed walls. 4 school buses were moved and 31 others were peppered by flying debris. Learn more about tornado history at tornadotalk.com.
All right, time to dig into the email inbox to see if something's in there this week.
We do. One of the emails that came in is from our friend Harvey, who sent a cute video of bald eagles that were protecting eggs from a tornado-warned storm. It was super cute. Thank you for that. It put a smile on my face. And then we just got an email in, hot off the wire here. This is from Brian Fowler, who just said, enjoying show tonight with Trisha and Philip. They are very knowledgeable and passionate about the people they serve. In reference to recovery time, Southwest Florida is still recovering from Hurricane Ian. In particular, Sanibel Island, Fort Myers Beach, and Iona. Thousands of homes were lost and never replaced. And the beaches changed dramatically and have been further impacted this year by Debbie, Helene, and Milton. The old Florida charm up and down the Gulf Coast is gone for good since Ian. No one who lives here wants to be like Miami, but it's headed in that direction. It's very sad to think about, but I think he's right. And then I wanted to mention a quick note that I got from our friend Johnny Parker. He sent me a text today. Well, my 2025 is off to a great start. He had a severe line of storms go through and knocked 2 big trees down in his yard. No major damage to the house except for a few shingles. And then not too far away, an EF1. This was not too far from the Aberdeen area. Started just west of his county EMA office. So our friend Johnny, as you know, went through the Smithville EF5 in 2011. So I love his attitude though. He's like, this is how my year's starting off. He goes, I just can't get away from it. So thank you, Johnny, for sharing with us. We're glad that you're safe. Thank you for your emails. Email at weatherbrains.com. Flood that email box. We want to get your questions, your show suggestions for 2025 so we can get Bill to work here because he keeps going on, these little trips and stuff, but we need to get him working to get people on the show. And make sure that you give us your name and your email address, please, so we could reply back to you. We're still having a little bit of a snafu, but we appreciate it. Thanks for watching and listening. Back to you, Span.
All right, good deal. Let's do picks of the week. We're going to go around the horn. Everybody will come up with something that is really cool related to weather. And this can be a website, data source. It can be hardware, software, anything remotely close to weather. So let's go to James Adelot before he does the 9 o'clock news, which is coming up soon. James, what's on your mind? Give us a pick.
Well, I discovered this weekend watching Wichita get hammered with the snow that they have a real-time web page of all of their snowplows. You can watch them move. But better yet, they've all named them into something very winter and weather related, like Plowosaurus Rex, Thaw Enforcement, Blizzard of Oz. It's hilarious. And I can't believe I laughed so hard at this Saturday night and Sunday. It was amazing.
This is outstanding. This is good stuff. So again, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Troy Kimmel, I know you have a good pick for us this week.
Yeah, speaking about going around the horn, you can go for the horn.
Let's blow that thing one more time.
Yeah, there you go.
Just love the tone. Oh, that makes me feel good. All right. Are you officially retired, Troy?
I was told that, but I don't realize that yet. So, yeah, I guess so.
Well, what's it like on the other side? Tell us. I mean, come on.
I hadn't had a chance. This has only been, a week, I guess, down the road, 6 or 7 days, but still got a lot of this stuff going on. And now we got this winter storm in Texas, so having to kind of deal with that. And my apologies to Philip and to Tricia tonight that's where I've been pulled about 20 different directions here tonight. I think someone finally realizes a winter storm on the way that we need to do this, we need to do that, and 2 days ahead of time, calling it a little quick there. So,
I don't think you ever retire from the weather business. It's like the Hotel California.
Yeah,
you can check out, but you can never leave.
Yeah.
So it never stops, which is what we do here. Yep. Okay, Kim, give us a good pick of the week.
Oh no, I'm gonna need the foghorn too. But I will say, I know. I really did. I took the holiday period just super off, and in part because of something that this crew got to see during the show today. I had a puppy that was nibbling on my fingers. We got a little dog for Christmas for the kids, and he's super adorable. But I've been very absorbed in child number 4, which is essentially become. And so my apologies. But I will say it is so striking. Retirement from the weather community just doesn't seem possible. Troy, you're fictionally retired. Mike Farrer, my boss at NSEP until just a couple of days ago, he was the director of NSEP. He retired to go work at a private company. Okay, that's not retirement, Mike. It's not actually retiring. I just whatever, man. The Hotel California is an apt comparison. So maybe, perhaps my pick will be the Hotel California.
There you go.
I'll take that.
We are all there. We are all at the Hotel California.
I'm telling people, Kim, on my end that I'm deciding what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm using that for myself and James Spann. So, just decide. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll figure it out at some point. Yep. All right, Rick Smith, give us a great pick. Go.
You can never really retire because the weather follows you everywhere you go. You can't escape it. So we talked about earlier, the predecessor rain event. So I found a quick study. Didn't read the whole thing, but I think it's interesting to kind of give you a sense of what a predecessor rain event is and how it impacted the impacts of Hurricane Helene. So that's my pick.
Outstanding. Okay, Jen, your turn. Go. Give us a good pick.
So I think one of the best X accounts is the Lawrence, Kansas Police Department. They are hilarious. And so way better than anything you ever get on the talk. But there's just a couple of the things in a thread that they wrote about the snowstorm. This is on January 3rd. Snowstorms in Lawrence, a thread. If you're leaving your house because you have to work, just be careful. If you're leaving your house for a mango rhubarb slushie, first of all, gross. Second of all, you don't need it. Two, if you tap your brakes and start to slide on ice so you brake harder, you're just going to slide harder than crypto sellers slide into our DMs. They're fabulous. They are fabulous.
Outstanding.
Please run and follow them right now.
That's outstanding. That is too good. All right, so Philip and Tricia, we've stalled here for a while. I think Tricia's got one. Philip, you got a good pick for us? I know you got something good. Go.
Ooh, I got two quick ones. One is a North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality website. It's just historical North Carolina landslide events. It's actually a really great resource, and it reflects, among other things, the work that a lot of my coworkers at Appalachian Landslide Consultants have been involved with for decades in Western North Carolina, trying to keep landslides and storms on people's minds. Second one is NOAA's post-Helene imagery in Western North Carolina. The resolution is outstanding. You can quite literally count the giant boulders that tumbled down the rocky broad, and you can flip from pre-Helene to post-Helene to see just what the storm did. It streams just through a browser, and it's a really excellent resource.
Excellent. We'll put all the links up on our website, weatherbrains.com. Okay, Tricia, go. I know you got a good one.
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. So my pick was the USGS story map on the Great Flood of 1916. Like I said, you can't really understand what happened with Helene without understanding the previous flood of record in Western North Carolina. So I really recommend folks look through that. It's a great story map that the USGS put together. So take a look at it.
Excellent. Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, James, just a few notes I took down. We mentioned an email from Johnny Parker. Johnny's dad is making honey. He's a beekeeper now, James. And this honey is outstanding. So if you get lucky enough to get some of Johnny Parker's family's honey, you'll enjoy it. Someone, I think Tricia mentioned the Samaritan's Purse earlier. That's the favorite charity of our friend Charles Peak. And I thought I needed to mention that because he is constantly letting us know that those guys are really good at what they do. So that's cool. And my pick of the week is courtesy of our friend Jared Rennie, who was mentioned earlier in the show tonight. It is the NWA, the National Weather Association Professional Development Committee, is hosting a webinar on January 8th at 3:30 Eastern Time. And appropriately entitled Helene, a meteorological, climatological, and emotional analysis. So please go and register for that. And our very own Tricia Palmer will be starring in that, right, Tricia?
Yep, I'll be talking a lot about Helene the next couple of weeks. I'm doing an AMS panel next week too, virtually. So it's all about Helene.
But we have
you will learn that this will follow you. Helene will follow you for the rest of your career.
It will.
You will think about it almost every day.
Yep.
And it's just a part of your being, and it's a part of who you are now. And you were meant to be in that building at that place at that time to work that event. So never forget that. You did an incredible job. Is there anything we need to promote, Tricia? Websites or anything we need to plug before we wrap it up here?
I can't think of anything necessarily we need to promote or plug. I did put in the chat. I put it's a work in progress. We've been very busy, but we did put we're starting to put together our summary. I know other offices have done a much better job getting a Helene summary put together, but I did put it in the chat if folks are interested in seeing what we've got put together. I mean, we issued 16 flash flood emergencies during the event, which is in our office's history before this, we'd only issued 10. Flash flood emergencies have only been around since, I guess, 2014. So, but still, this was a remarkable event. So if folks want to see the radar loop and the flash flood emergencies, and if anybody has any questions, I'm an open book. You can reach out to me. I can't count the number of media interviews we've done. Just reach out. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm happy to talk about our office's performance or the products that we've issued. Or I did a river podcast with somebody in Colorado talking about the rivers and stuff. So just reach out. I'm happy to talk about it.
Awesome. So Philip, any websites or anything we need to plug on your behalf before we wrap it up?
I'll give you the Appalachian Landslide Consultants website as well. It actually has a lot of sort of almost like blogs that we've put together over the years talking about past events in Western North Carolina and what we do to try to weigh in on the slope stability story, which is one of those things that you don't deal with all the time, but when you do, it's quite serious. And I'll get those links up to the DEQ page and the NOAA imagery as well.
Awesome. We'll put those up on weatherbrains.com. So
okay.
Thanks to everybody. It's been a great show. If you're new here, we typically do the show on Monday nights at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern. You can watch it live, the video version, youtube.com/weatherbrains. But most of you listen to the audio podcast. We know that. However you consume the show, thank you. And if you want to send us an email, please do. The email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful week and God bless. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Trisha.
Thank you so much.
Trisha, thanks, Philip.
Thank you, guys.
Excellent content.